Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I bring you greetings from United Theological Seminary of the Twin Cities, where we have been flourishing the last few years under the leadership of the Baptist Molly Marshall, who we've been delighted to have as president for the last few years. We do, in the social transformation program that I direct, we also have another professor, Gary Green III, who is also Baptist. So there might be a small Baptist takeover at United right now, and we're very happy for it. So. I also want to thank Brian and Laura, James and Absinthe for all of your help in getting me up here and making this all possible. So thank you so much. And particularly to thank AWAB for the life-giving and life-changing faithful work that you are engaged in. And to all of you for being here tonight. I stand here as a transgender person, as a queer person, an academic, someone in a same-sex marriage, all identities which feel under siege at the moment and under threat, as well as the situations that we face as Americans around free speech and free thought and human rights. And so being here with you tonight is a comfort to be in this sanctuary in multiple senses of the word sanctuary, right? To be in sanctuary with you tonight. And it's also a joy to be able to celebrate our communities, our connections, the work that we do together. So thank you for giving me this opportunity. Okay. So writer Demian Barr, in a book that a memoir I came across recently, he has a memoir of his life as a gay teen in Scotland in the 1980s. I recommend it. He tells in the book about a pivotal decision he makes in the midst of a pretty chaotic childhood. At one time, he became deeply involved in his school's Bible club, in part because the bullies wouldn't be seen dead there. So he joins Bible club, but when he comes out, things change. And he's been made well aware of the ways in which the interpretation of the Bible and the attitudes of religious people condemn him. He prays to Jesus, and he articulates that he still has a love for Jesus, but he says, I decide then and there that I have to break up with Jesus. After years of praying and being good, I'm getting nowhere. I've got faith, but I'm rapidly running out of hope. And the only way for him to retain his hope is to break up with Jesus. I begin with this passage because I think it shows us the ways in which literature and art in general can illuminate for us the spiritual path that queer and trans people take, with its struggles and its liberative capacities. I'm particularly interested in what happens to people in our community when we break up with Jesus. As Barr notes, and I'm sure you know, faith remains, but trust in religious institutions and hope are much harder to come by. Because as the young Barr recognizes, the potential for harm may be much greater than the positives for many people in our communities. Yet here we are, we're in the walls of a church. Here I am, an ordained minister, and many of us still find meaning in the life, teachings, ministry, and resurrection of Jesus. But I would argue that it's vital to us, to fulfilling that faith and the calling that comes with us, that we explore the spiritual lives of those who have broken up with Jesus or other forms of religion. And my methodology for doing so, for how do we understand people who are outside of religious institutions, which is what theology and religious studies often study, how do we do that? I do it by examining our community's creation of works of art that deal with the spiritual. So tonight, I'm going to suggest 3 specific reasons why I believe that it's vital for us to engage in the work of understanding what's happening outside of our institutions and somewhat within them. And that is to reveal, to resist, and to revel, which is what I titled my talk. So here's how we're going to do this. Oh, yeah, it worked. Okay, so first I'm going to offer some words of introduction about what I mean by those terms and why I think visual art in particular is a valuable resource for doing so. Then I'm going to share some works of art for us to explore together, and then finally I'm going to share some words of conclusion. But instead of speaking to you for 45 minutes and then taking Q&A at the end, I'm going to pause briefly at each section for your questions and comments at Laura's suggestion, and you're going to help the audience ask those questions. So, cool? Okay, so that's our format for tonight. All right. So to reveal, to resist, and to revel. So this is a slide by an image of a photograph by the Nigerian-British photographer Rotimi Fani-Kayode, who here uses clothing and ritual objects from his family tradition as Yoruba priests to depict the connection between these two men. It is a beautiful image of the sacred and the sexual. So LGBTQ people have left religious institutions in much higher numbers than those who are heteronormative in their gender and sexuality. And I don't have to tell you that this is, of course, in large part because of anti-trans and homophobic attitudes in many institutionalized religions. But as we've already covered, leaving behind organized religion doesn't mean losing your faith. And this has led to a fabulously diverse DIY, do-it-yourself, collection of spiritual practices, beliefs, and groups, which we in turn can learn a great deal from. And I would say Fani-Kayode's work is definitely a DIY bringing together of these different beliefs to illustrate a point of spirituality. So why use the arts as a means of inquiry into the spiritual lives of queer and trans people? First, the visual arts have played a significant role in the development of LGBTQ visibility and in advocacy. Art and aesthetics have been intrinsic elements of queer cultures. At times, homosexuality and the arts have been so closely associated that there's been a conflation of the two, such as assumptions that all artists or art collectors are inherently gay, for example. Artist circles and places outside of mainstream society have often made space for sexual minorities and for alternative gender presentations. Therefore, art merits a place in discussions of queer expression and identity, if we're to look at them comprehensively. And this includes a consideration of the role of queer art as a foundational source for theology. Second, the artists we'll be looking at are confronted with a challenge. That is, how do you portray people so that the viewer knows that they are visibly and recognizably queer, and that they are obviously in the context of the sacred? The goal is for the viewer to understand that the subject is not heterosexual or gender normative, and thus cannot look like anyone else, or cannot look like just like everyone else. How do you know a queer person who looks just like everyone else? How do you know that subject is queer, right? So having to show people who look visibly queer or visibly trans pushes back against the tendency to assimilate. So one contribution that queer artists make is pushing us out of an assimilationist, we're just like everyone else mode. Moreover, if the artist succeeds in creating queer sacred art, then the viewer is also going to comprehend that this is a holy image. And this confronts head-on the popular and ecclesiastical narratives in which queer identity and religion are placed in opposition. So not only do these works of art challenge this idea, but they also offer a replacement for it, in which gender, sexuality, and spirituality intertwine. They're in the same image. So this substitution of positive images that connect spirituality, gender, and sexuality can be significant in reshaping attitudes and perceptions of queer life and queer religiosity. And this can in turn offer us a new way in which to consider questions about the relationship between sexuality and spirituality, which at times still seem hopelessly mired in the ruts of the decades-old arguments about the religious acceptability of homosexuality and the more recent fervor around gender identities. Art literally offers us a vision of different possibilities. So here, in looking at these works of art, we are not going to encounter the question of whether or not the Bible condemns homosexuality, but instead, artists look at how do we live in the face of those negative interpretations. Rather than asking if God could be on the side of gender and sexual minorities, these artists show us what it looks like when the holy pops up in our midst. And instead of justification, this art portrays sacred encounters. And this can have a profound and expansive effect on our understandings of sexuality and spirituality. In other words, offering affirmations in place of apologetics. So queer and trans art give us at least three gifts, as I mentioned: to reveal to us the nature and the needs of our people, our communities, to resist forces like assimilation and dehumanization, and to revel in the profound richness of our spiritual lives. Trans and queer lives are often rendered invisible and our spiritual needs subsumed within other cultures and narratives. For example, the recent removal of all gay and trans-specific content from national suicide hotlines is a perfect example of that, sort of assuming that our needs are not separate or our needs are not valid. We who care for, about, and with LGBTQ people benefit from exploring what specific spiritual needs we have, and art is one way to do that. Art is also a powerful means of resistance. Researchers point out, this is my social transformation scholar nerd, researchers point out that one of the most dangerous signs of impending political violence is the tendency to dehumanize and scapegoat people in minority groups. And that's why it profoundly matters right now whether we speak of migrants as human beings rather than as illegals or aliens or worse. And it deeply matters when transgender people are being falsely scapegoated as disproportionately responsible for mass murder, even when the evidence overwhelmingly points to trans people being victims of violence, not perpetrators of violence. So art is able to show us these complex human lives, holy and beloved by God, which can resist these trends of dehumanization and scapegoating, and even re-sacralize visions of our lives. And that, in turn, I believe, can save lives. And queer art can revel in our distinctiveness, celebrating sexuality, spirituality, expression in new and exciting ways. People on the margins may see blessedness in places that are often overlooked, ignored, or desecrated. We can see visions of the divine and our place within God's realm in new ways and rejoice in that. Okay. I always have this fear of speaking about something that you can't see, and that doesn't help very much. So I want to begin with one artist whose work I think includes all three of these themes in a profound way. Gabriel Garcia Roman is a Mexican-American artist who came to the United States as a young child. He photographs his subjects, who are primarily queer people of color and immigrants, and invites them to write a statement in their own handwriting to include in the image. And he transforms all of these pieces into a series of prints, which he calls the queer icons, which he has referred to as his life's work. So I want to begin here, both because his work is illustrative of my point, and because the work is beautiful, but also because he reminds us of the intersections of spirituality, justice, sexual orientation, and gender identity, that our community includes people of all colors, nationalities, and ways of being. Cool. So queer icons follows visually the history of European saint paintings of the Renaissance period. It uses lush backgrounds and golden halos to denote the figures as holy. Well, sometimes different colors, halos, but. So each subject is invited to show up wearing the clothes of their choice, preferably something that makes them feel powerful or beautiful. The artist spends time with them talking before taking the images. And as he photographs them, he suggests they think about concepts like power, pride, royalty, resistance, or defiance. He says, quote, "Everyday people inspire me. Specifically, immigrant communities and queer communities inspire me. Two groups that live on the margins of society, yet with all the obstacles placed before them, they are resilient. They make do with the little that is given to them." And then he goes on to make something magnificent out of really very little, these very simple portrait photographs, the handwriting, and these colors and textures and background. So they're both simple but very complex artistic images. So this is an image of the twins, Melanie and Melora Green. These two women directed the African American Art and Cultural Complex in San Francisco until this past month. And they have been a powerful force as curators and art leaders there. And they draw their energy, they say, in part from being twins, particularly as related to the Yoruba concept of ibeji, or the power of twinship, as part of the cosmology of the Yoruba people. So note here the strength of their gazes and their bodies. Here's what they've written in the background. Think highly of yourself. Think to and for yourself. Identity is so intimate that we often forget to check inside. Ask yourself many questions. Before you die, take the time to know thyself. I'm the best thing I could ever give us, because I bring me, we, be. Time is meant for you to know you, so you can add yourself to the mix, the life, love, true self. We are here in this world for a divine purpose, to no imagination. The role of the artist is to make the revolution irresistible. Ibeji, Milky Way, green, beyond, Benjamin, Tate, Cole, Mom, Mississippi, Choctaw, Creole, Niji, Memphis, our land. Crown yourself. You are God. So in this text, not only do we see the revealed images of their faces and bodies in the photographs, but in these words they reveal aspects of their heritage, their beliefs. They say, we are here in this world for a divine purpose, to no imagination. An identity is so intimate, but we often forget to check inside. These are very revealing statements about their personhood. But there's also this very powerful call to resistance. The role of the artist is to make the revolution irresistible. I love that. I would also argue that that's the role of people of faith, is to make the revolution and the realm of God irresistible. And they talk about the means to do that, to make that revolution irresistible and make it happen. Think highly of yourself. Think to and for yourself. And there is this celebration of their spirituality. Get curious about yourself so you can add to the mix, the life, love, true self. Here's a second image from the series, Isaac Perez. The text here reads, my people are trans, non-binary, intersex, queer, elders, youth. My people are undocumented, incarcerated, seeking asylum. My people are struggling with mental health. My people are chronically ill. My people are resilient AF. My people are black and brown. I am compassionate, a caretaker, a TO, a visionary, an abolitionist, sacred. I am Latinx, Chicanx, LA, a lover, loved, loving, complicated, resilient, grounded. I am brown, trans, two-spirit, masked femme, Native American, indigenous. I am a water protector, an elder in training, healing from trauma. I am my ancestors, my transcestors, my two-spirit siblings. I am here for all of it, the good, the bad, the messy. I am here for the struggle and the joy, the pain, the love. I'm here for the pleasure, reclaiming, trans women. I am here for my people, ceremony. I am here for the ones before me and after me. The imagery in these photographs furthers these ideas with this rich mix of jewel tones and gold, the halos and textures of sumptuous fabrics in the background. This is a queer, sacred image. We know the subject is queer. We know it is sacred. It's also a calming one, offering a space of refuge in an often inhospitable world. Sacredness is asserted and assumed here. It's not a question. The artist comments about his subjects, quote, they are the modern-day saints of our community. I see halos as a badge of honor. Saints are human beings that went above and beyond their call as humans for the betterment of humankind. They earned their halos. So I think we'll take our first pause for some questions or comments at this point for about 5 minutes, and then...
Yes. So, yes, I get to be the little MC runner-arounder person. So if you have just like a question, maybe you'd like to hear more, you had a question about something on an image for our lecturer, just raise your hand and I will come and, let you talk into the mic. And we're using the mic as well, I will say, because if we record this lecture and release it, we'd like people to be able to hear your question. So anybody with a question or something? Here we go.
I'm just curious how you were able to discover these artists in your journey, because they're so incredible.
Yeah, thank you. So I did one smart thing when I was working on my dissertation for my PhD, which is I thought, if I go to the library and look at books that really interest me on the break between my first 2 semesters, if I pick up books that I want to read on the break, those are books that I'm going to want to read. I'm going to finish my PhD because I want to keep reading the books. That was a smart thing. So I came across actually the next artist I'm going to talk about there, and that sort of led me to, I knew I was interested in queer artists, a source of spirituality. But then I just have to do lots of internet searches, and one artist mentions another artist, so I have this like nerdy list and spreadsheet of all kinds of different artists. And so I do like randomly, occasionally Google like queer art, trans artist, lesbian artist, and find things and doing research that way. But it kind of, it snowballs on one on the other, and then you just keep finding, different folks who just have really fascinating visions. Yeah. So thank you.
Just a technical question and request. Is it possible the images you're showing us can be saved also in the recording of this evening?
We're going to try our best to do that. I believe we will. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for your interest. Yeah. Any other question? You have a question?
Hi, I have a hearing difficulty, but what I want to ask you is these particular drawings or silk screens of the two women and this man and the other man with the halos, are they representing God within us? Because I'm missing a lot of what you're saying.
So for the artist conception, to him they represent saints. So he's specifically trying to focus on them as saints. However, I would say part of the power of the texts that he includes with these images is people asserting their holiness. So they're not to be seen necessarily as God, but godly or holy, sacred people in and of their right. So it's a way of saying that these are sacred human beings and sacred images, but not necessarily in this artist's conception's representation of God. Now, I will say, as someone who teaches art history, who studies art, I definitely subscribe to the fact that, as an artist myself, you put an image out there, there's a relationship not just between the artist and the work of art, the artist and the viewer, but between the viewer and the artwork itself. So in other words, if God speaks to you through the image that this is an image of what I look like, that is your right, your experience as a viewer of that work of art. So just because the artist intends one thing, you may have a different experience of that, and that is completely valid. So I think some of these images, you get more out of them by understanding some of the context, but you don't have to. You could just gaze on them and experience them and see what the divine has to say to you through the image.
All right, thank you so much. I think we have time for one more question, and I do want to just pause and say that if you would like to move somewhere where you can hear better or where you can see better while we take this last question before I resume the lecture, please do so. Please be where you can hear and see the way that you want.
Thank you. I'm curious to know if the subjects were aware of the artist's kind of final product of this iconography, and if you are aware of any of their personal, I guess, journeys through seeing themselves as icons, and if I imagine that they all went on their own journey,
right,
to discover that and capture that own vision of themselves as icons.
That's a great question. So I do know that yes, they're aware of how their images are going to be used, and in fact, it's really important to the artist to be collaborative in it, which is why they write the texts that go with their images. And I talked a little about the process of, preparing and being a part of that. But I love your question about people's reactions to seeing their works as this. I have not read anything, but I'm gonna look for it because that's a great insight. But yeah, it is definitely meant to be. And you can Google queer icons, and there's a ton of these other images. I just picked a couple out of this series that I felt were particularly meaningful and particularly had a sacred or religious element to them. So yeah. Okay. Cool. All right. So. So now we're going to continue, and I'm going to share several other works of art with you. As I mentioned, there are so many works of art. There's so many things I wanted to share. I was still cutting things in my hotel room so we wouldn't be here all night. So there's a lot of other wonderful things to show you. But I picked some of the ones that are some of my favorites that I think are particularly important for this conversation. Mostly Christian, but not exclusively. There was definitely more religious diversity in the intro slides, and if we don't have questions at the end, I can also run through those or answer questions about them to you. But I'm hoping we'd go a little bit in depth by instead of giving you a survey, run through a bunch of images. We're going to look at a few in a little more detail, because I think that would be meaningful. So this is David Wojnarowicz. He was a self-taught artist who experienced very profound abuse as a child, and he became a hustler in New York City in Times Square as a teenager. And he was raised in the church, but he didn't really have any use for organized religion, feeling that God and the church had failed to protect him as a child. The family priest did not protect him, and he had this, tells in his memoir, of going out to the side, telling God, I'm going to meet you at the side of the house, and you better have an answer for what's going on with me. And God, according to Wojnarowicz's memoir, did not show up for that. And yet, so he has no use for religious institutions. He's skeptical about God, except there's a lot of spirituality in his work as well. So in one of his earliest works is this 1979 collage untitled Genet, which shows the French writer and former male prostitute and prisoner Jean Genet haloed and standing before an altarpiece. And the altarpiece has a modified version of Guido Reni's portrait of Christ. It's a pretty famous painting, but Wojnarowicz controversially adds this hypodermic needle in Christ's arm. And he sought to depict the pain and alienation of drug addiction that he saw every day working as a hustler in New York. And he drew upon long-established and respected Christian aesthetic traditions of the suffering Christ. To Wojnarowicz, Jesus would share the suffering of those who were most in pain. That's part of what he took from his childhood religion. And note that there's both this image of violence in the church. There's a guy with a machine gun there. And up in the corner, a bunch of angels hovering around Genet. So the church here is simultaneously dangerous and a sanctuary. Critic Cynthia Carr described Wojnarowicz: where the marginal were ignored, he would exalt them. Where his love for other men was despised, he would give homosexuality a mythic, heroic dimension. And where certain immoral moralists held political power, he would attack with ferocity. To him, this wasn't politics, it was truth. He saw the sacredness and the suffering of queer people around him, especially gay male hustlers, and he offered them a vision of holiness by, as he said, nominating Genet as a saint, as one of us, and showing Christ's solidarity with them. Wojnarowicz, however, is best known for his unfinished film called Fire in My Belly, which was shot in Mexico in 1986. It is a really strange movie. It shows the aftermath of the earthquake in Mexico City, mummies, the artist with his mouth apparently sewn shut, loaves of bread and dripping blood. Objects fly in and out of the frames, and the perspective changes frequently. Don't watch it if you're already feeling dizzy. But the most controversial section of the film shows fire ants, as you see here in the still, crawling across a crucifix. Wojnarowicz saw the ants as parallel to human society, and he intended to illustrate the mechanistic way in which we can perform religion while completely ignoring the suffering, its ethics, and its values. So ants are mechanistically crawling on a crucifix because they're not paying any attention to what Jesus did. What does that image mean, right? They're just crawling mindlessly across it. Conservatives have repeatedly denounced this film and have succeeded in getting it removed from public view multiple times, from when it was first made in the 1980s until being removed from the Smithsonian about 10 years ago. And they ignore its critique of religiosity. That is to say that people who are simply reacting on the basis of religion are not paying attention to its values. So even on after his death from AIDS in 1992, Wojnarowicz continues to provoke and challenge through the use of this and other images. So let me share with you another artist who is also dealing with HIV and AIDS from a spiritual perspective, as Wojnarowicz was. This is Albert Wynn's installation piece called Blood on the Doorpost and the AIDS Mezuzah, which represents a very different use of spirituality. The artist literally took part of his own blood, his HIV-positive blood, and combined it with a symbol of Jewish spirituality that directly connects with the story of the Exodus. So Wynn at the time was a student an art student in photography. He went on to become an instructor, a photography professor. But in his artist statement about this, he writes, when I heard of AIDS referred to as a plague, I thought, how ironic that I, a Jew, a descendant of those Hebrew slaves spared from all the plagues, would succumb to one. I wanted a gesture that would cause the angel of death to pass by me, and I thought about smearing blood on my doorposts. The idea of an AIDS mezuzah emerged from the imagery of the Exodus story. I needed something that would transform my experience while staying in the context of my tradition. I wanted something that would continue to make my life and my Jewishness meaningful, and to bring a sense of order to the chaos I found myself living. As I'd also been aware of the slow and ineffectual response of the Jewish community to the AIDS crisis. Hundreds, maybe thousands of Jews have suffered and died of AIDS. This is quite dated, so at the time that was true. Yet in an organized communal response, the Jewish world seemed silent. The effect on me was a sense of invisibility, of alienation and separation. I wondered how I was going to make the Jewish world take notice of the suffering that was going on in its midst, and thought of using traditional Jewish rituals, symbols, and objects to deliver the message. So he's reclaiming his heritage as part of his own process. So on World AIDS Day in 1996, the Magnus Museum at the University of California, Berkeley, displayed Wynn's work. It was encased in lucite, and the brass mezuzah contained a sealed vial of blood installed by a gay rabbi, Alan Bennett. So I just want to point out the mezuzah is that part in the center. The lucite case is because people were afraid of getting into contact with the blood, even though the blood once withdrawn from the body was not dangerous. But the exhibit caused fear and outrage. A museum staffer commented to a reporter, "People are more outraged by the AIDS mezuzah than they are by the AIDS crisis." So Wynn used the rituals of Judaism to implore God to spare his own life, and he literally inserts himself into his Jewish tradition and ritual. The artwork itself forms a prayer. His blood is where usually the traditional scripture passages were placed, and those are on what's on the side. The traditional passages are on the side there. So the artwork forms a prayer made from the body of the artist for the protection of the artist. So he's showing the ways in which queer people have a right to our own religious heritage, our own traditions, in order to make meaning for our lives and even spare our lives, as he said. So part of what I mentioned was reveling and enjoying queer spirituality. So I'm going to share with you a very different image that has both a funny and a more serious side. So this is Alma Lopez, who's an artist in Southern California, a Mexican-American artist, and she frequently depicts the Virgin of Guadalupe. She's also famous for a work called Our Lady, which if you're interested in controversies with the right about religious imagery, I can tell you about that later. But Lopez draws upon pre-conquest images of goddesses, particularly Coyolxauhqui, who was a moon goddess who was dismembered in pre-contact Mexican cosmology, and modern cultural icons to create these innovative interpretations to queer complex symbols from her heritage. So the Virgin of Guadalupe, in case you don't know the story, the Virgin Mary appeared to Juan Diego, who was a Mexican indigenous person, a peasant during colonial times. And part of the revolutionary aspect of it is that the Virgin revealed herself to him, and the colonial authorities did not believe that the Virgin would appear to someone who's indigenous to Mexico. So she made roses bloom in the winter, and he carries them in his cloak and shows them to the bishop, who is forced to believe that the Virgin has in fact appeared not only to the colonizers, but to the colonized as a liberation force. So Lopez writes about this. She says, "When I look at the image of La Virgen de Guadalupe, I see a complex, activist, revolutionary cultural icon. To me, she is the poster image for the first successful act of mass nonviolence, civil resistance, disobedience on this continent. Like the Aztec moon goddess Coyolxauhqui, La Virgen de Guadalupe needs to be deciphered and remembered. Hundreds of years of conquest and Catholic misinformation shifted her meaning. She documents the spirit of indigenous resistance." So this is a piece called Lupe and Cyrena in Love, which is a digital collage, and it demonstrates how she brings together these images. In a lecture she gave at Pacific School of Religion, she described how the placement of these two bodies in an intimate embrace was not initially a deliberate choice on her part, but happened while she was moving her mouse around, while she was meditating on the meanings of the Virgin of Guadalupe and her love for the indigenous people of Mexico. And the Virgin and Cyrena's lips came together as she moved the figures with her cursor, and her initial response, she said, was shock, like, could I do that? But then upon consideration, she said, I thought, well, why not? Why not? I mean, on the one side, the Virgin of Guadalupe, she's very famous and popular, and I'm sure she wanted to hook up with pretty much anybody. She'd feel very confident. And on the other side was the mermaid from the Loteria. You know, she's sexy. I mean, that's kind of the surface, the funny part of it. The real thing is about love. But she does go on to describe this image as that magnificent hookup. So there are multiple layers to the composition, which is very characteristic of Lopez's work. So the background includes the skyline of Los Angeles, and in the center left, an image of a man on foot running from the Border Patrol along a dusty road. Down here. Here's the road. So through the use of these photographs, she connects the relationship between this sort of funny hookup of Lupe and Cyrena and these larger struggles that happen on both sides of the US-Mexico border. And this theme is further reinforced by the photograph of the border fence itself. That's the Mexican side. The American side doesn't have graffiti. The Mexican side has lots of graffiti. And a traditional image of the Virgin of Guadalupe. There's the date there that says 1848, which references the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which ended the Mexican-American War and ceded large portions of Mexican territory to the United States. So it actually is a reference to the turning point that turned Southern California from being part of Mexico to being the border with Mexico. So in the context of Lupe and Cyrena in love, in this artwork, it points to the human-created nature of political and social borders that are imposed upon the physical and cultural landscape. This is reinforced by the words Mapa de la Guerra de los Unidos con Mexico, which means the map of the war of the U.S. with Mexico. That's down in this lower corner, down here. So combined with this image of the contemporary image of the border brings the sense of timelessness or bridging time between then and now, right? So it's referencing the before the treaty, after the treaty, current times. The border creates its own sense of time. And this has a theological and cultural significance. So feminist theologian Nancy Pineda-Madrid writes, perhaps the most significant contribution Latina feminist theology will make is to invite Christians to develop a borderlands vision of the gospel message. This kind of vision has developed out of the experiences of speaking two languages, English and Spanish, knowing two practices of faith, Latino popular religious practices, and Euro-American church rituals, and experiencing two ways of being human, Euro-American and Latino. A borderlands vision is not unique to Latinos. Many communities in the United States know this experience. For example, African Americans, Native Americans, LGBTQ communities, the differently abled, and others. But in naming it, Pineda-Madrid says, Latina feminist theologians stand for the proposition that this vision carries the possibility of expanding our understanding of what it means to be human. When we embrace a borderlands vision, we also grow in our embrace of the radical life to which God calls us. We learn to embrace others who are very different from ourselves. In the process, the world becomes a more humane place, and a more God-filled place, a place of creativity and imagination and transformation. In the same way, Lopez here creates new possibilities for the borderland. She's adding these embodied dualities of lesbian and straight, masculine and feminine to the equation. Her vision parallels that of Pineda-Madrid in seeking a world that is more humane and blessed with the presence of the divine, including in the queer lives she depicts. At the bottom of this image of Lupe and Cyrena in love, we see a viceroy butterfly, along with the traditional moon on which the Virgin of Guadalupe stands, and a friend of hers standing in for the angel with her chest bare. In Spanish, the word for butterfly is mariposa, which is linguistically connected to the slang terms for fag, maricon, and dyke, marimacha, which she's using deliberately here. She uses the butterfly in part because of their paths of migration between Mexico and the United States as well. And she writes about this particular butterfly in this painting, or this image. Like the monarch butterfly, indigenous peoples of this continent have migrated between both countries. Yet as of 1848, after the signing of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which marked the ending of the 1946 to 1948 U.S.-Mexico War, a border has been erected, impeding this natural migration. So we tend to get stuck on one side or the other. Our families are divided. Racist, discriminatory policies arise due to a fear of a growing Latino population north of that razor-sharp border fence. The reason I chose to use the viceroy butterfly was because I wanted to allude to more than the monarch's migration pattern and its genetic memories. I thought it was interesting that the viceroy butterfly mimics the monarch for survival purposes. The monarch butterfly is poisonous to predators. The viceroy is not. The viceroy pretends to be something it is not, just to be able to exist. For me, the viceroy mirrors parallel and intersecting histories of being different or other, even within our own communities. Racist attitudes see us Latinos as criminals and an economic burden, and homophobic attitudes, even within our own communities and our families, may see us as perverted or deviant. So from outside and inside our communities, we are perceived as something we are not, when in essence, we are vulnerable viceroy butterflies just trying to live and survive. So in the foreground, you see the titular figures of Lupe and Cyrena. Lupe is a common nickname for Guadalupe. In their embrace, surrounded by these rather kitschy blonde cherubs who seem to be parting yellow curtains to reveal the scene within, adding this kind of performative element. The little angels bear roses and blue ribbons, the Virgin's symbol and color. And Lupe and Cyrena have rich black hair showing their Mexican heritage. Lopez describes this creation. The most obvious interpretation is the physical. Lupe, as a top, cradles Cyrena's left breast with her left hand while lightly spanking her fishy bottom with her right hand. Cyrena loses herself in Lupe's eyes as she strokes her hair with her left hand and reaches with her right hand to touch Lupe's hand. This is an intimate, physical, sexual embrace between two famous female Mexican icons. The specifics of their interactions, spanking, stroking, and gazing, further humanizes the two female figures. They're icons, but they behave like living women in their playfulness and passions. The Loteria game that the Cyrena is from uses a series of cards that each has an image or an object on it, in this case, Cyrena the mermaid. The purpose of the game is similar to bingo, but for some people it also includes a fortune-telling component, somewhat like a tarot deck. Cyrena can therefore then refer in Mexican popular culture, but also to a sense of being able to discern what is beyond the ordinary plane. And Lopez points out that of all the images in the deck, Cyrena is the only one who's a hybrid, fish and human, and one whose genitals are obscured, making her a symbol of mixed gender as well as identity. So in this image, Lopez both plays with and explores lesbian identity and the complexity of the borderlands in the context of lesbian sexuality. So this is an image by Mexico City-based artist Nahum Zanil, who also has a deep devotion to the Virgin of Guadalupe. He became aware of his homosexuality and to a sense of being different from his family early on. And when he was asked in an interview about whether his search for God was a conscious one, the artist responded, "I believe so. It was a response to a need I had from the time I was very young, and it became stronger as I felt more isolated, more alone. This feeling was very strong and horrible also, precisely because I was surrounded by my family. I shared their language, their acts, their daily rituals, but I always felt apart, foreign, alone. Maybe that is why I had to make for myself another family. The Virgin Mary became my mother, and Christ took the place of my father." So this very familial identification with the Virgin of Guadalupe and Jesus mitigated some of the extreme isolation he experienced daily as a young gay child in rural Mexico. And this strategy of making a place for himself in the midst of isolation, finding affirmation from the spiritual realm when it was not to be found elsewhere, can be seen over and over again in his work. It's a profoundly revolutionary act for a gay man in his context. Instead of seeing the Virgin and Jesus as symbols or as part of the anti-sexual, anti-gay Mexican Catholic Church, he instead sees them as his salvation from isolation. And salvation from societal and religious condemnation and conservatism. The clarity of his childhood faith and his connection with the Virgin and Jesus matured into this deep understanding of profound blessing with critical political and spiritual implications which are expressed through his writing and his art. One of the primary ways in which Zanil disassembles traditional imagery and reformulates it into a personal expression is through self-portraiture. In almost every one of his paintings, Zanil uses his own face face, both on his own body or on other bodies like that of Christ or the saints or other figures. And then he also often includes an image of his lover, or sometimes includes his lover, who's here. So in 1990, Zenil painted this painting, Bendiciones, which means blessings. The Virgin of Guadalupe is seen on the tilma on the wall. Up here, and it's a very traditional depiction of her. And roses pour down from the bottom of the tilma, from the cloak, more from the cloth itself than from the figure, since they also come from the marginal areas of the fabric, flowing down in this steady stream upon Zenil and his lover, Gerardo of Vilches. In fact, the flowers are piling up against the lower edges of the image, right? You see the roses are streaming behind and in front of them. If this continues, they'll be engulfed in the blossoms piling up around them. The frame of the picture almost seems to form a container in which the roses are flowing. Otherwise, they'd fill the room, right, spreading out horizontally. The roses, as I said, were the validation of the Virgin of Guadalupe's existence. And so that here they function in the same way that they prove that the Virgin had appeared to an indigenous Mexican. Here they're demonstrating the reality of the Virgin's life and her blessing in the lives of two gay men, in the lives of those who are marginalized similarly by ecclesiastical authorities. So here, Zenil extends her blessing, showing it applies to this gay couple. And this is a portrait of two men who at this point have spent many years together and who experience in the past, present, and presumably the future, the timeless blessings of the Virgin. Her abundant roses here bestow an extravagant blessing on this couple, right? She's not holding back. The Virgin is in the upper half, while Vilches and Zenil are in the lower portion, and the separation of the paintings may express the distinction between sort of the natural and supernatural world, but then the motions of the flowers break that line, right? They unify the composition. The roses draw the viewer's eyes from the top, the heavenly world, to the bottom, the earthly love shared by these two men, and they link them thematically. They have been together for more than 40 years now, and they share an extremely strong bond. In a book about Mexican gay couples, the two men identify spirituality as central to their lifelong commitment. It says in the book, they admit that living together is not easy, but together they seek solutions to the problems because, quote, we want to continue living together until our deaths. And so the adversities become minimized because they have a much more important objective. For them, quote, seeking spiritual enrichment to be better is one of the bases which has kept us together for so long. In this permanent and continual search, they have learned to avoid jealousy, dislikes, and problems, and to focus their energies on the positive. It is in this depth of lifelong commitment, grounded and enhanced by their spiritual seeking, that's reflected in Bendiciones. Their mutual search for spiritual connection, supported and enhanced by the others, is rewarded through the blessings of the Virgin. This is a deeply personal and devotional image, but it's also a revolutionary one that has strong socio-political content. In a country that, it can be argued, is centered on the Virgin of Guadalupe. If you go to Mexico, her images, her altars, her devotees permeate the landscape. Zenil has placed himself and his lover in that center. Rather than depicting himself as one exiled from society or the church by Mexican norms or isolated by virtue of sexuality, he instead moves the cultural icon and center, the Virgin, into his home, to his location, blessing him and his love for Vilches. We see his inner devotion and her reciprocal love for him. Zenil was actively creating sexually explicit works of art during the same period of time. So this isn't a repudiation of themes of sexuality. Rather, it's showing the integration of sexuality and spirituality and this expansive expression of the Virgin's love for intimacy and relationships between men. It's a faith that refuses to be confined by papal rules, societal limitations, prudery, or shame. It's boundless, fulfilling, devoted, and sexual. His traditional artworks makes her blessings quite clear and poses to the faithful the challenge to accept those to whom the Virgin herself has appeared. In other words, if the Virgin has blessed these men, how can the Church and the faithful continue to reject them? Moreover, Zenil's art represents his ongoing fulfillment of his religious obligation to proclaim this blessing to the world in thanksgiving for the Virgin's continued protection and presence in his life. He must witness to the truth of her revelation that includes an acceptance of same-sex love and a love for gay men. Society's rejection in no way reduces his responsibility to proclaiming her blessing on him. In fact, he feels he must witness to the Virgin's love. And by aligning and connecting the sacred and the erotic, he transforms the narrative around sexuality of you ought to be ashamed to you are being blessed. One last image. Christy C. Rhodes' Next World Tarot is a revolutionary tarot deck which points us to a world after the fall of patriarchy, in which queers, people of color, women, the indigenous, disabled people, and others on the margins have survived and are building a new world, the next world. Spirituality is most certainly at the center of their work. The Cuban-American artist described the deck to one interviewer as an oracle of resistance. What I find particularly interesting about the Next World Tarot is the ways in which the content and medium work together to predict a liberated and liberating future. That is, tarot decks have traditionally been used as a form of divination, a means to see the future, and she's creating illustrations of what she envisions and embodies could come in a liberated world. So she's offering us a glimpse of what can or will or hopefully be ahead for humanity. So this method of reading tarot works together with the images of the cards to help us imagine this possible future. And it expands the category of images usually seen in tarot to show a variety of varieties of disability, age, size, in addition to gender, sexuality, and race. She also uses friends and community members as models for the various cards, rooting them in the contemporary struggle for justice, commenting, quote, "We want to find ourselves in our decks, and we want them to tell our story. Our stories are about smashing systemic oppression, owning our truths, being accountable to the people and places that support us, and taking back a connection to your body that may have been lost through trauma or societal brainwashing." So she's redrawn the cards and redone the meanings of the cards. And they also say, when I asked them about, this seems pretty apocalyptic in many of the image, they describe the theme saying, it's the end of the world, but it's a good end of the world. It's about a world that is after the world we have now. The revolution has happened, and these characters are surviving on the ashes of that revolution. There are a lot of cards that represent scenes or places or situations that are relevant to our lives now, but I wanted to maintain the vibe that these people just healed. These people just had the trauma. They just had the shitty thing happen, and now they are ready to go. So it's depicting a dystopian world even while they're looking towards the healing of the world. So I wanted to share, this is an image of the magician. Usually the magician is male with wands, who talks about people accomplishing goals, setting out, being in control, setting out to do things like that. Whereas this is her image of the musician that says the magician is a trailblazer, a torch in her own right, carrying progressive solutions to survival, well-being, intuitive knowledge, and the definition of justice. The magician walks in the shoes of her ancestors with bouncing soles made for paving concrete and reworking the fabric of the world. Here marks a phase, an age, a portal into the next stage of your life. From this point on, you have agency. You believe firmly in your power, despite the potentially negative influence of the world that surrounds you. As a leader, the magician asks you to investigate the foundations of your intent. Is there a history of self-sabotage? Are you compromising your truth? Are you working towards initiatives that perpetuate hate? Or are you truly elevating the voices on every margin, including your own? The magician asks you to concentrate on your goals through both practical wisdom, revolutionary respect, and creative magic. She asks you to wield your gifts and your learned skills into resources that heal and transform the world. And then this is her card for the lovers, which affirms self-love. It celebrates the beauty of people of size and those with disabilities, as well as those who are gender non-normative. It uses the spoon metaphor of disability, the person's holding a spoon, that those with chronic illnesses only have a certain limited amount of energy represented by the spoons. When they have used up their spoons, they must rest, recharge, and regain their spoons. Rhodes writes, the lovers are the electricity between contrasted energies, their choice between methods of survival and discovery of a pristine middle ground. The lovers are a sacred point where power emerges from the spine. The lovers are the feeling of warmth and belonging, the meeting where you felt heard and the gathering where you felt alive. The lovers are two halves of a whole, intuitively joined at the hip and made for one another.
Before we get to section 3, we can just take another pause, maybe to breathe and settle with all of that wonderful and powerful imagery. But also, if there are any questions like clarification or something that's on your mind. And we had a lot of questions over here, so I'll give this side dibs. Dibs? Okay, maybe we just need a breath too, that's okay. Okay, question? No? Okay. All right, we will come back for more.
Okay.
I think we are just
The
odd. So let's yeah.
Okay. The conclusion is not long. Bell Hooks, in a conversation with artist Amelia Mesa Baines about cultural criticism and commonality between peoples of color, said, "Imagination plays a vital role in the struggle for liberation globally. It is our imaginative skill that we bring to creative work that promotes, enhances, and sustains democracy and individual freedom. What we cannot imagine cannot come into being." So these queer creative works of art help us imagine what must come into being for the survival of queer people of color and the rest of us on the margins, for trans people, for non-binary people, for all those who are under threat. The goal is to liberate our conceptions of both holy and human so that we might liberate trans and queer people using whatever tools and metaphors are available to us. These works of art offer opportunities to restore right relationships among us, showing us what it means to be free from oppression and unwanted domination, to be blessed, and to be holy. The diverse images illustrate what right relationships are between us as people, free from racism, homophobia, transphobia, even between us and the earth. We can see a new vision for humanity. We can dismantle oppression systems of the past. We have seen in these artworks, some serious, some funny, a tenderness for the queer subject that stems both from the artists and, within their art, from the divine. Here, queer bodies are affirmed as sacred and accepted as holy. They are loved. Sexuality emerges as a means for learning about the divine, expressing our deepest love for one another, and a source for existential and physical joy. This year alone, 49 states have considered almost 1,000 pieces of legislation that would legalize discrimination against LGBTQ people in the United States, particularly trans people. Virtually everyone supporting these bills in public testimony claims to be doing so in the name of Christianity. These are significant threats to our continuing well-being in our country, particularly those who are non-binary, trans, who are people of color, immigrants, and from other stigmatized groups. And unfortunately, I believe for all sexual and gender minorities and those who love us. The erosion of human and civil rights in this country is profoundly alarming. And while we've made significant progress in LGBTQ inclusion in the church, there still remains considerable opposition to the idea that the queer and the holy can coexist, much less thrive in each other's companies. Yet that is what these artists have set about to do. In these works of art, we see a flourishing of spirituality with and within the queer body that challenges and takes to task those who seek to exclude and persecute on the basis of faith. The power of these works is in part their documentation of a spirituality that thrives in the midst of a religion and a world that too often remains hostile. These works of art document the presence of the divine in the form of the Abrahamic God, the Virgin Mary, as well as other gods and goddesses and figures who blesses and encourages queer people. I illustrated that here with an image of the Buraq, a winged creature of indeterminate gender who conveyed Muhammad into the presence of Allah. It's now been reclaimed as a symbol for trans Muslims. So you see here the playing up or the emphasizing of the non-binary, traditional non-binary aspect of the Buraq. And it's a symbol of a way of bringing us, of noting that our community can be conveyed into the presence of the holy, that we are a part of the sacred story. The divine faithfulness to queer people is shown over and over again, whether it's through the appearance of the Virgin of Guadalupe, the angels of the Exodus, the transformed magician, or the companionship between queer peoples. It is, as we've seen here, a reciprocal loyalty, right? So there's the love of the divinity for us and our love for the holy. Despite the hostile treatment of queer people in some sects of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, these artists show the depth of human longing for the holy that has not been set aside. These works of art and the hundreds, perhaps even thousands of works by other queer artists in the same theme show the tenacity and the resilience of our community for communion with the divine. Art has the capacity to queer theology by showing us alternatives in which queer and trans bodies are blessed and joyful and sex is meaningful and liberated. These opportunities to newly envision this reality by seeing not only within our minds but with our eyes expands our world. By seeing this vision, we increase our chances of creating such a world in our midst. Moreover, by seeing the diversity of sanctified queer bodies, we are reminded of the urgency of human liberation for a time in which every body is seen as holy, made in the imago Dei, worthy of love and pleasure. Thank you.